Welcome everybody to our first B2B consulting webinar. This is a follow-up to the session that we ran with two of our colleagues yesterday on the 1st of April. We didn't record it at the time, but what we've done is a follow-up discussion trying to replicate some of the points and questions that were raised at the time. So welcome to my colleagues here today. So I've got Ian Busby and I've got Hugh Abbott. So perhaps guys, you'd like to introduce yourself, Hugh and Ian.
So my name's Hugh Abbott, thanks Nicola, and I work as Principal Consultant in Automation at B2E.
Welcome, Hugh.
And I'm Ian Busby, and I've done a series of projects for B2E and have been supporting the business redesign area of B2E's consulting propositions.
Okay, so thanks very much. So Hugh, I'll hand over to you, and if you want to run this like you ran the session yesterday, I think that's probably the best way.
Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, my name's Hugh Abbott, and one of the roles that I do in B2E is to organise events, and obviously a great topic of great interest for our community is the COVID-19 outbreak, and indeed the help that government is offering small businesses. Ian foolishly volunteered to research or digest all the announcements coming out of government, and we boiled it down to three things. So there's some deferrals that you can do about your tax, and then there's this idea about furlough if you are an employee, but also most of our community are not employees in the classic form. They work through personal services company, PSC. And so what does furlough mean for a personal services company? So those are the three topics we're going to cover. Okay, so great. Ian, do you want to just kick off with those two deferrals about tax?
So basically, there are several ways in which people can seek immediate relief on the tax front. One is that VAT payments due between 20th of March and 30th of June, that's payments, not submissions, are suspended or can be suspended until the end of the financial year. And of course, if you've got a direct debit arrangement in place, as HMRC say, you need to stop that, otherwise your payment will be automatically debited. Second is HMRC have also offered relief from the interim self-assessment payment that people would often need to make in mid-financial year. That's postponed till January 2021 as well. And finally, HMRC has said that anybody who has any difficulties or issues or concerns about general tax payments or corporation tax payments should get in touch with them. And we do know, Hugh, that there's at least one individual in the B2E network who has been in touch over deferral or reshaping of corporation tax payments, and they've succeeded in getting an agreement from HMRC to a different arrangement.
Okay. So the advice there is, if you are having trouble, to ring up HMRC. They seem to be quite reasonable.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And so, Ian, what do you mean specifically by being on paid leave during the furlough?
Well, what furlough means in the context of paid leave is that an employee does no work, provides no services whatsoever to the employer, and, for example, does not work to generate income or earnings for the employer. The only exceptions to this are that the employee can finish training courses, and if they are doing voluntary assignments in other areas, social benefit type assignments, they can continue to do those. But otherwise, to all intents and purposes, you cannot do whatsoever as a
Okay, so the government, just to clarify, therefore, if you were working for a large organisation, let's say Sainsbury's or BT or whoever, that organisation could put you on leave. So, but you're not allowed to work for Sainsbury's or BT, and then those organisations can claim 80% of your wages from this relief scheme. That's right.
They can claim 80% of your employment costs up to a maximum of £2,500 per month. And that the issue of how that relates to NI and other types of employment costs, such as pensions payments, I think still needs a little bit further clarification. But if everybody just holds in their mind that there is a maximum amount of 2,500 that can be contributed towards employment costs, that's the thing you have to think about. No more than £2,500.
Okay, but as I said right at the start, this is for most of our people in our community are not working for large organisations. They're normally working for their own personal services company, so it doesn't really apply to our community. How might it work with a personal services company?
Okay, well, legal opinion at the moment, and I am collecting opinions and views from a range of lawyers and accountants. So the views I express are not my views, they're the views of the professional community on this. So the legal opinions at the moment say, first off, that if you are the director of your own personal services company, you can effectively put yourself on furlough. The way it might be done, or probably is done, rather than writing yourself a letter that you then sign and send back, is to make a self-declaration, a formal self-declaration. Wisely, you lodge that declaration with your accountants or any other professionals that would provide you with services, so there's a clear record beyond you and your environment that you've done this. And having done that, you would then continue to record payments to yourself through your PAYE payroll, because all of this is administered and managed through PAYE payroll records.
Okay.
So you would continue to do that. And basically, let's assume, Hugh, that you were paying yourself £1,000 a month, typically, as through PAYE payroll. Government would provide you £1 grant to cover that.
Okay. So Ian, just to clarify, if you are working for a personal services company, so most of our people in the community, most of our consultants have their own personal services companies, and therefore they would normally minimise their tax by paying themselves approximately £1,000 per month, and the rest of their income they would receive through dividends. But you are saying that that it is possible, if they so choose, to claim 80% of their PAYE payment, so approximately 80% of £1,000, £800 per month from the government in this scheme.
That's it, yeah.
So Ian, how does that apply to dividends then?
It doesn't cover dividends. It is purely a PAYE scheme. I suspect, although I wouldn't know the detail, the reasons for that is that PAYE is a very clearly recorded month by month payment scheme, so the records exist. If you start considering other sources of income that somebody who's a self-employed might be getting, it begins to become quite a complicated scheme to administer, and what the government is trying to do is to do things as quickly and as simply as possible in the first instance to help people out.
So Ian, this is quite a funny position that a lot of people might find themselves in, because if they are the sole employee and the sole director of their company, and they put themselves on furlough, does that mean that their company, that they're obviously not allowed to work for their company? Does that mean their company must stop trading? Directors aren't allowed to do that, be director of a company that can't trade. So how does that work?
Well, I don't think there's any blockage on a director being a director of a company that doesn't trade and is still a going concern. I think not trading does not equal not being a going concern. I think the bigger issue is over the question of providing no services to the company, which is part of the job retention scheme statement. And clearly, as a director, you do have fiduciary duties. You do have also, in many cases, very simple admin duties like paying yourself. So one area that remains very unclear in respect to personal services companies is how a director can put themselves on furlough and still enable themselves to do the basic minimum fiduciary and administrative work that's required to enable them to stay on furlough and the company to stay as a going concern. Government have not clarified that point. The lawyer's view is that it should be possible. There is a little bit of intelligence that Companies House are discussing these issues with HMRC, but so far there has been no clarification at all in this area.
Okay, so it just means that you can go on furlough, you can do a minimum amount you're not allowed to go out and prospect for work with clients or work for clients or work to bring money in, but you can do the minimum amount of work that keeps the company trading as a going concern.
I think there are two possibilities here for people to consider. One is that you might appoint another person as a director who then takes on the role that you would not do in terms of fiduciary duties and small administrative duties, and that could be a trusted third party, and that would allow you completely to step aside from the business. The other approach which I would adopt if I were to go down this route would be to make an assumption that government is going to be reasonable at the end of the day and accept that there are minimal duties that people need to undertake. Otherwise, the individuals are in breach of the law and regulatory requirements, and you can't put yourself in breach of the law and regulatory requirements. So it depends. People need to decide on what kind of level of risk they want to take. Belt and braces, get somebody else to be the director, step completely aside. Other route, do the minimum, bearing in mind business development, doing work, anything like that through your company just simply cannot, in principle, be allowed.
So that's quite clear. So if you want to be squeaky clean, ask your partner, your wife or your husband to be a director and get them to do the minimum amount of work to keep the company trading. You, though, can't go out and do work, prospecting for work, getting money in, but that would keep the company going. You think, however, it's probably not necessary, and you could probably do the minimum amount of work to keep the company trading, because we think that HMRC are going to be reasonable. I guess they will be reasonable in this period.
I think, Hugh, I wouldn't use the word trading, I'd use the word functioning. But what you've raised is also another issue which is very clear in the government's guidance both to employers and to employees, which is the furlough arrangement applies to you as an employee of the company that puts you on furlough. So let's say somebody is working in two different environments. One area they have their personal services company. In another part of their work, they may be in employment or acting as a self-employed sole trader. The furlough arrangement doesn't preclude them from their other sources and channels of work. It just relates to them and their PSC. So it may well be, but one's got to be careful about walking the tightrope here, that other sources of income and work that people are pursuing would fall outside the furlough arrangement. They could continue with them. They wouldn't be subject to the 80% rule and so on and so forth if that work was outside of their PSC boundaries.
Okay, well, that's clear. Well, I think we've covered most of what we wanted to talk about, which is the deferral, the sort of definition of furlough, and also how furlough might be applied to a personal services company. And we did have some questions from attendees. And Nicola, perhaps you could ask some of those questions.
Yeah, sure. So we made a note at some of those questions as they came through. They won't be an exact replica, but I'll try to convey the main points. So I see that some of the questions that came through we've already answered in this chat, but I can see one that came through was around if one has two limited companies where you are a sole employee on both. Do you think that means you can claim furlough on both?
Well, the rules as stated, or the advice as stated by government, is that the two are and you can claim furlough from any company for whom you're employed if you are put on paid leave. So you have the rather paradoxical situation that essentially that £2,500 limit applies to you if you only work for one company. If you work for two companies, in principle, it can be £5,000. Okay. But you have to be able to support this through past PAYE records. So you can't just determine that you're going to do it now. It has to be how you have been working, and it has to be evidenced.
Okay. Do we know if there are different regulations for Wales?
Our assumption is that England and Wales would be the same. I have no idea whether there are any minor differences in respect of Scotland or Northern Ireland.
Okay. Have we any potentially, or have you seen any good examples of template furlough letters at all, Ian?
Well, I have produced a very short self-declaration furlough letter based upon a couple of template letters that I've received from mid-sized accounting firms. These are quite short letters. In principle, they don't need to be very long, and they clearly need to state when your furlough started. It can be backdated to the 1st of March. It needs to state when you propose to end, so that could be either in X weeks' time or for an indefinite period. People just have to recognise that the minimum furlough period is 3 weeks. So you have to be away for 3 weeks. And also, the point is that it's not a one-way commitment or a single commitment. You can be off for 3 weeks in principle, come back for a few weeks, go on furlough again. You can bounce in and out of your furlough relationship. And if you say for an indefinite period, you can shorten that, indefinite, clearly you can shorten it. So it's quite a flexible scheme, bearing in mind that there is still underpinning this binary requirement that if you're on furlough, you don't essentially work for that business whilst you're on furlough. So Hugh and I have knocked up between us, just purely for people's benefit, a short example of what a potential self-declaration could look like, and I think Hugh, we can probably make that available with a proviso that this is not a legally approved document. No lawyer has seen it, no accountant has seen it. We might give people an idea as to where to start. Yeah.
Okay. And just either get me on LinkedIn or Ian on LinkedIn or Nicola on LinkedIn. I'm sure we can provide it to you.
Okay. What if somebody isn't currently on a contract at the moment? Potentially their contract has ended or they've been laid off. What sort of support have you come across, Ian?
Well, in terms of people who are running their own personal services companies, let's say, for example, that their last working day was the 27th of February. Mm-hmm. They can backdate these arrangements to the 1st of March. That's the furthest you can backdate the arrangements. So you can claim as if you were still being paid or paying yourself back to the 1st of March. Otherwise, the issue about do people have access to cash, we fall back on the standard government approaches to this is consider whether your loans might be available to you. And I understand, the government's rethinking the whole loan environment and overdraft environments and things for people. So there's that. The other is looking at universal credit as an option. We're no experts in universal credit. It's complicated, but it does have a threshold point of £16,000 in personal savings before you become eligible to make a claim. And just to re-emphasize, that's personal savings. So if you've got money in your business bank account that is in a different legal entity from you as a person. You as a person have your own bank accounts with your own money in it and potentially savings elsewhere. So just be aware that when you're thinking about, if you are thinking about universal credit, it's about personal savings as I understand it, but I haven't gone through the process of the means testing and how it works.
Okay. And one of the questions that came up was particularly around contractors supplying services to public sector clients, and perhaps there was a slightly different approach, maybe?
Well, I think what's clear is that the public sector, certainly the Cabinet Office, have sent an edict out to every public sector body saying, if you have suppliers working for you, regardless of size and regardless of whether they're self-employed or companies, you must do everything you can to ease the cash flow of these suppliers, paying them as quickly as you can, reducing the amount of bureaucracy around the approval of invoices and so on. So if you have contractual work at the moment with a public sector body, they are under an obligation to move as fast as they can to support you. There's a document which is called PPN 02/20, that's PPN 02/20, through which the Cabinet Office have set out the details of this edict to every public sector body. So for people still working in public sector enterprises, if you feel you're not being treated particularly well, get hold of that document, read it, show it to the people who you're concerned are not necessarily applying its principles effectively.
Okay, I'll just do a couple more. In a scenario where we have two directors of a company, where one is generating income and the other isn't due to the situation, can the non-fee earning employee also go on furlough or alternatively go on furlough?
Well, there's a difference between earning fees and getting paid. So the issue about a PSC is that you earn, the company is earning and the company is paying. So if you have a company with two people in it, one is earning and the other isn't, it's not material to to who gets paid what and on furlough. The real issue is if you are not, if you are going to be yourself unpaid as a result of the coronavirus epidemic, Instead of that, you can put yourself on paid leave. The company pays you up to the limits we've talked about, and the government provides support for that. So who's working, who's not working, in the sense of fee earning, isn't really the question. It's who's being paid that determines the arrangements you make.
Okay. And if somebody is in a furlough or have taken the furlough and also need to self-isolate or are potentially on bill at the same time, can they take advantage of statutory sick pay at the same time as being furloughed and receiving the money through the furlough as well?
Well, that's getting me into areas of detail. Again, if that question arises, certainly the first place I would go is to the job retention scheme document that does cover areas like statutory sick pay, it does cover maternity leave, it covers a range of issues that employees who are on furlough may face, and it gives advice both to the employer and to the employee on what best to do. But that's a very easily accessible document. You just put Government Job Retention Scheme coronavirus in a search engine and you'll get right to the government site. Great.
And then I guess the sort of final question is probably back to Hugh. There was obviously a lot of discussion and chats around useful things to be doing at this time. I know you've already had some thinking around this and have got some other assets that we can share on that, but your thoughts on that?
Well, so Ian and I have been speaking about probably the positive side of the coronavirus, and we're not really, obviously it's going to impact most of us and impact us in the pocket, but I think we see a brighter side, a brighter future. Ian, what do you think about the upturn when it comes?
Well, I think first off, we don't know when it will come, but I think on the positive side, the suspension of IR35 in terms of its impact on consultants and people doing interim work is important, because it does mean that as and when companies decide to ramp up, they no longer have to go through this process of determining whether people are to be employed or not to be employed. That lasts until April 2021, could I guess be extended, the suspension. But in the short term, if a company needs to bring people on board quickly, IR35 isn't going to be a block to that. The other thing I would say is that in my experience, when companies have had to move quickly to reinitiate projects or to restructure themselves or to build up their capacity, going through longish term processes of recruitment of people is quite slow, and therefore you would imagine that in many cases companies needing to get back on track would in fact look to B2E and similar organisations for rapidly available and also tried and tested and trusted expertise and resource to work on those projects. So I think that is a potential positive. So also I think that when companies start to look forward once the crisis is ending, the question for them is, do I really want to return to my old ways of working? Or is there now a real opportunity for me to change things? Potentially, for example, to develop the ways of working I've adopted during the crisis, and so on and so forth. I would say, given past history on this, and you might think about the fall of the communist bloc in Eastern Europe as an example, a vast amount of transformation and change work was initiated as a result of companies being able and wanting to do things in a different way. I include the public sector in that as well. So for me, that is going to provide potentially a really major opportunity for the consulting community as a whole, and one that I'm sure we in B2E and our community in B2E would be looking to exploit.
Well, I think you're right. You know, we thrive, or consultants thrive, when there is change. That's what we do best. So, we help people through an organisation through change. So yeah, very good point there. Really, I'd like to finish on my own thoughts that in this downtime there is some really useful stuff that we can do. We can get ourselves market ready for the upturn. We're pretty sure there will be an upturn. How do we make sure that we are market ready for that upturn? Well, there's work to be done on your LinkedIn profile. There's a study to do. There's lots of great online e-learning to partake in, and indeed think about your market focus. Think about where you can best sell yourself, where you're most likely to be successful. And to that end, we've got 3 more webinars coming up. So please look at the B2E website for those webinars and join in. But I would just like to say thank you very much to Ian, who spent so much time digesting and the information coming out of government and making it so understandable for us. Thank you very much, Ian, and thank you, Nicola.
Thank you, guys. Thanks.